Okay, continuing on with your notes, we're going to start to look at the organization of the body. And to start that, there's different cavities. So the body is divided basically into two main sections. Axial or axis down the center, and then appendicular is anything that comes off of, so your limbs, your arms, your legs, that come off of the axial portion. The axial portion contains several cavities. Brain, central, so spine, cranial cavity is part of your axial portion. Vertebral or vertebral, can be pronounced either way, is what houses your spinal cord, includes your vertebrae. Thoracic cavity is your chest cavity. It's going to house your heart, your lungs, and the mediastinum that separates them. Abdominal pelvic is one cavity that can be broken into two. So abdominal pelvic includes your abdominal cavity, which is pretty much your digestive organs and the spleen. And then pelvic cavity sits a little bit lower, bottom of the large intestine, reproductive structures, and bladder. And then there's a broad, thin muscle that I'm assuming that you've heard of before. The diaphragm is a thin muscle that basically separates your thoracic cavity from your abdominal pelvic cavity. And that diaphragm is very important in breathing, so we'll talk about that again when we get to the respiratory system. So diagrams, good to study. These are on your online activities. You should know these cavities. I expect you to know these diagrams. So cranial, vertebral, thoracic, here's the ones that we just went over. And here is another view from the front instead of the side. Here you can see the thoracic cavity includes your pleural. Pleural deals with lungs. So pleurisy, pleural means that it has something to do with lungs. So notice I have a left pleural cavity. In your book, it's on the right side because you're looking at it backwards. Remember, when you're looking at the body, this is my right side, this is my left side. So it's going to look opposite in diagrams. Cardio deals with heart. So whenever you see something that has cardio, cardia, that's going to deal with your heart. And then abdominal and pelvic, we already talked about that one. Smaller cavities, sinus cavities, probably something that you're familiar with if you've had sinus headaches, sinus pressure. So there's smaller cavities inside of your head specifically, oral cavities, your mouth, nasal cavities, the nose, and then you have orbital cavities, that's your eyes, and then some of your ear and nasal, so sinuses, that's actually a space basically, and that's why you can get bacteria up in there, and that's why you'll end up with sinus infection. Okay, as far as notes go, this is a very important page. So I would maybe mark this one. Inside of your cavities, you have membranes. Most of them are double layered. So I am going to have the parietal part. Parietal attaches to a wall cavity. So parietal is going to be on the outside, think. Visceral attaches directly to the organ. And I'll go to a diagram shortly so you can see that. Visceral organ, right on the organ. Parietal is going to be outside. So the thoracic cavity in particular has pleural membranes. Pleural meaning lung area. So the parietal means outside. Parietal pleura lines the cavity, lines the outside. While the visceral pleura is the lining right on the lungs. It covers the lungs. And then there's typically fluid in between those two. and that fluid is going to help protect, reduces friction. It's a very protective layer in between. So if I move on to the heart, I see cardia, deals with heart. I'm going to have pericardial membranes. Parietal pericardium, if you've ever heard that someone's heart has fluid on the heart, that fluid is going to fill up that cavity in between these two membranes. So parietal pericardium is going to be the outside of the sac, or the lining outside of the cavity. And the visceral pericardium lines the heart itself. Peritoneal deals more with abdominal. So there again, I'm going to have a parietal that's on the outside, and I'm going to have a visceral that's going to actually cover organs. So if I look at this from the top, so I've made a horizontal cut, I'm looking down at the organs. Here is a lung, here's a lung. So if this is my lung, the lining right on the lung is going to be my visceral pleura. Visceral lines the organ. So visceral is the lining right on the lung. Parietal means outside. So my parietal pleura is the outside of that cavity. So that's parietal, that's visceral, and then this cavity that's in between is where that fluid is. So visceral is going to be on an organ, parietal is going to be outside of the cavity. So same thing if I look at my heart, here's the heart right here, my visceral pericardium, visceral is going to line the heart itself, and then my parietal pericardium is going to be here on the outside of that cavity, and there's going to be fluid in between them. So remember, visceral on the organ, parietal outside of the cavity. And then here's just basically kind of the same thing. I can look at peritoneum, so now I'm looking at, this would be my liver, which is part of my digestive system, so that's why it's peritoneum. Visceral is going to be right on my liver. Parietal is going to be outside of the liver, or outside of the cavity. Here's that space, the actual cavity in between, and there will be fluid in that cavity. And I will stop there for right now.